Chapter 1, what is health? Okay. So first, when I ask you that question, okay, what is health? How? Well, maybe an easier question is, how do you know if you're being healthy? What are some ways that you think like, oh man, I'm being healthy today or this week or this month or whatever? Anyone? Yes. Sorry. Okay, so something that aligns with your well-being. Okay, that's good. So give me an example of something that would align with your well-being. Okay, good. So exercising, that's good. So if you exercise, you're being healthy. Good. What else? How do you know you're being healthy? I'm gonna call on names randomly as I remember them. I know there's a Brent. Who's that? Ah, there we are. Good. Okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah. So a huge component is mental health, being able to say like today is going to be better than yesterday. That's good. I saw a quote recently that was like, I'm not depressed. I'm just responding appropriately to the world around me, which I think is kind of interesting. Because, you know, certainly well, that's one of the major kind of consequences of this kind of COVID pandemic, right? Is the toll that it's taken on our mental health, and the toll that it's taken on like our mental health care providers. Like I think I told you guys last time, I'm confusing the classes, but oftentimes your counselors see counselors, right? Your psychologist will go see psychologists. Your professors will see psychologists, right? One of my friends, actually one of my neighbors who's a clinical health counselor, he's actually got his master's in social work. He just got a job with the VA at the end of December. And as soon as he got the job as a clinical mental health counselor, he's booked out to the end of April. Right? So those people are in, you know, really high demand, and obviously there's a huge need for it given our current kind of circumstances. Okay, so mental health. What else? Remember, you guys want me to remember other random names and just like call them out? Okay, good. So kind of being conscious about what you eat, thinking about your diet. Okay, what else? What else? What? Right. So doing kind of what's right for you, right? Doing kind of listening to your body, right? That's important. Okay. So these are, I mean, I think health is at the forefront of most people's minds. And I think we can define health differently. In this class, we tend to take a pretty heavy kind of heavy, how do I get rid of this? Heavy cultural bent. Right? So we think culture as this kind of all-encompassing aspect, and we'll talk more about the definition of culture and things like that. But it encompasses race, ethnicity, religion, where you come from, nationality, geography, your gender. And in this class, one of the main perspectives that we take in explaining how people become healthy is through this biopsychosocial model of health. So it incorporates your biological self, so your genes, your physiology, but also your psychological self, right? So your essentially your mental health, your personality, and then also social basis of health. Okay, so your socioeconomic status, for example, your available social support, and so on. So we think these things directly affect your health, okay? And they also affect your health through your health behaviors. Right? So for example, if you're low SES, that might affect your SES is socioeconomic status, right? So low SES can affect your health by having poor access to healthy foods, right? If you live in poorer communities, you might not have good access to healthy foods, or you might not have access to quality medical care. Right? So again, we take a pretty heavy kind of cultural perspective in this class, in terms of how we define health. Now, health defined by the World Health Organization, I think that was one of the questions on your quiz, actually, is the complete physical, mental, and social well-being. Other people have also pushed for like a spiritual component as well, but that's not included in the official definition from the World Health Organization. Right? Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. Health right now is conceptualized as a continuum from really good health to really poor health, or really poor health to really good health. Right? So, we, this week we might kind of classify ourselves as having good health. The next week we might not. There are some issues with this conceptualization. I think sometimes we do this to rationalize like unhealthy behaviors. Right? Sometimes people do what's known as like banking. Right? So they feel like, oh man, this week I've been really good, and then I can kind of let myself go for whatever X number of days. Even in diets, they call them cheat days or whatever. Right? So it captures the fact that we rationalize some bad health behaviors. There's some problematic issues here. Is that some health behaviors are like pretty detrimental. Like if you smoke for like 20 years, those are really bad health habits, or that's a really bad health habit, right? So you can't be like, oh, I haven't quit smoking, or I've quit smoking for a month, now I'm in the good health category, right? Because some of those behaviors have really long-term detrimental effects, right? Smoking being one of them, right? That stuff will stay there for years, right? Other weaknesses in this, it's really difficult to define specific behaviors and like how much they're worth. Like if you sleep really well, how far does that get you into the good group, right? Or if you eat poorly, how much does that slide you into the bad health, right? So even though I'm offering all these kind of suggestions of how health is, or how this continuum of health is not the best way to think about health, it is sort of the current way that we do define health. We define health by this definition of the World Health Organization, and we do tend to see health from this continuum from bad health to good health. We certainly don't see it as dichotomous, right? It's not like one or the other. It's definitely on a sliding scale. Okay. So this is the World Health Organization definition. It's the complete, it's a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. Okay. This is what I want you guys to do really quick, just in groups of, I don't know, 2 or 3 or something. See if you can work out a better definition, right? If you can define health, how would you define it? Okay. What elements are missing from this definition that you would add, or what elements would you remove? Okay. So real quick, couple minutes, go. Get into a group, chat it up, write down the definition. I'll ask for it. Okay. All right. So what are some ways that you would kind of change or adapt this definition? Any volunteers before? Yeah, Cristobal. Okay. Yeah, so consistency or level of like reliability across time, right? That's good. So it's not just this moment, but generally speaking, how are you doing? Right. I like that a lot, actually, because but one of the main principles of like how we live our lives and how the types of things we should pay attention to, one of the main principles is like, whether we listen to the signal or the noise. Right. So the signal is the thing that happens most consistently. Right. So if you are trying to throw darts at a board, right? The thing that, the area that you're hitting most consistently, that's probably the signal that probably signifies how well you throw the darts. Right. Occasionally you'll miss, or hit the back wall, or hit the corner, or hit the bottom of the board or something. Those are, what we call outliers or noise. Right? Sometimes society has this strange sort of obsession with extremes, right? But the way that we define ourselves really should be what we do most consistently, not what we do occasionally, right? I'll give you guys another example. So do you guys know when, like, if you look out there now, like the leaves are changing on trees and like they're starting to fall, right? You guys know when trees decide that they should drop their leaves? What's a factor that leads them to like know, like, okay, this is a good time, I better drop my leaves, right? Prepare for the winter, huh? Yeah. Perfect, Miss Bravo. I love it. So it's the sun, right? It's not like, it's not necessarily temperature. Imagine if trees freaked out if they had a cold day and it's like, oh my God, better drop our leaves, right? Or oh my God, it's winter, but we had warm one day. Let's start growing back the leaves. That's really dangerous, right? Because if you grow back too early and you hit a freeze, now all your new leaves are dead, right? So trees, even trees do this, right? They don't pay attention to the small stuff, the stuff that fluctuates a lot. They pay attention to the stuff, the bigger picture stuff, like the sun, how much sunlight they get. That tends to be way more consistent than temperatures day to day, right? So I think that's a great addition, right? It's not kind of the random stuff that you do that kind of defines you. It's the signal. It's not the noise, right? That's good stuff. I like it. Anyone else? What did you guys add? I like that. So it's so the first one is incorporating like a spiritual component, right? Spirituality, religiosity is a huge predictor of health. There's some really practical elements to being really religious, right? Actually being religious tends to predict pretty good health outcomes. One of the main reasons for why that is that when you belong to a religion, you automatically qualify for this kind of special social group, right? So evolutionarily speaking, we know that if we are part of an in-group, our survival tends to be increased, right? When you are isolated and you're part of the out-group, you tend to not do as well. Imagine back in the hunter-gatherer days, right? If you're part of a group, you guys can take turns sleeping, right? And watching for predators and things like that. If you're off by yourself, you're probably not going to do very well. So religion serves as a means for us to identify our in-group. We know who our in-group members are. We know who which group that we belong to. When we get sick, our church members will, bring us foods, or like there are doctors within the group that can help. So they're like, our social network is improved that way, right? And the other element you mentioned is relationships, right? So I think that probably fits under the social well-being, right? Maintaining good relationships. That's good. Anyone else? What else would you guys add? Culture. In the environment and certain situations that come from that, that might also be encompassed under sort of this kind of social aspect, right? Social is kind of this broad thing that incorporates the environment around you, right? Other things you might add? No? Yeah, would weather conditions certainly. So maybe instead of weather, we should consider like climate, right? So there are some parts of the world that don't get as much sun, or they're cold all the time. Certainly that affects your health, because that affects the behaviors that you can engage in, right? So if you live, someone was telling me, like I visited with one of my former students. She's now a graduate student at UConn. She was an undergrad here. She did research in my lab and another lab, and she ended up getting like a full ride to do her PhD at the University of Connecticut. And she's from here. She's actually a DACA student, which is a really cool story. But she went up to UConn, Connecticut, and she's like, oh, there are some days when like the sun comes out at 11 and it goes away at 4. And if you sleep in a little late, like you have like 2 hours of sun, and that's it. Right? And so like most of us feel like or most of our active hours are when the sun's out. Right? So if you imagine aligning some of those health behaviors, either we're eating, we're exercising, or whatever, only when the sun's up, well, the hours are fewer, right? So certainly that can affect your health in terms of how that affects your behavior surrounding the weather, right? Or climate. So that's a good one. Good. So I asked you to do this because, like the World Health Organization, again, when we think of organizations, we think of them as being like institutions. Yes, partially, but institutions are always made up of people, right? So this definition is made of experts. So you could potentially be in a position where you are defining health, maybe not for the world, or maybe so, but maybe within your organization, maybe your work group, right? People are asked you, you're part of a group who's, in charge of defining what it is to have healthy employees and how the benefits and things are like that are assigned. So it's important to kind of think about that definition. Okay? And so definitions of health vary pretty widely depending on one's kind of upbringing and one's culture. So for example, in the Western context, usually we define health as an absence of disease. This is more in line with a biomedical model, okay? And this is a model that we've used for a long time, okay? We're trying to get to this biopsychosocial model, but for a long time, health is defined as an absence of disease, right? If you're not sick, you're healthy, right? Good-ish, maybe, but not really, right? Like, if you're not sad, are you happy? That's a stretch, right? Or the other way around, if you're not happy, are you sad? Probably not. There's probably a lot of other things in there, right? So here's sort of a brief outline. So for example, the Chinese traditional medicine, those are all elements of yin and yang. So it's a lot about balance. It's about balancing hot or cold. We'll talk more about this when we get into the chapter on culture. Indian tradition, the Ayurveda tradition, it's balance of mind, body, and spirit. Mexican tradition, balance of body types and energies. American Indian tradition, the Hmong tradition, which you'll see in your one book there. And here's one specific about the Ethiopian tradition, where it's kind of focused on prevention of spirit possession. So these are, quick summaries. Is that true of everyone who's from those areas who subscribe to those cultures. Probably not, but I think it does provide a quick overview of what we're talking about. Right? So culture has many dimensions. It includes race, ethnicity, beliefs, religion, sex, all that stuff. So it includes generally, physical characteristics, psychological characteristics, and, pretty kind of superficial stuff. Usually culture is relatively kind of, what's the term I'm looking for? Relatively like level. Like it tends to not make very drastic changes, but it does evolve over time. Right? So there is some changes, or there are some elements of it being dynamic, but for the most part, culture is relatively kind of static. And you'll probably see too, like in your everyday life, right? How, all the ways in which you're similar to your parents, but also like there's a twist to whatever it is. Right? So for example, like if you think about cooking in your tradition, right, whatever that might be. So I'm Vietnamese. When I think about cooking, so cooking Vietnamese food in Vietnam is slightly like different than cooking Vietnamese food in the US because of the ingredients available for the most part, right? And so recently, so if you don't know this, Houston has a huge Vietnamese population. It's actually got the highest concentration of Vietnamese American anywhere in the US, right? You would think like California, but no, it's Houston. And so what's interesting about Houston now is that if you go to a Vietnamese restaurant there, it's like second or third generation now. You go in and it's like, they're kind of kids like you guys. They're college educated kids born here, just like English is their primary language. They have all the technologies and things that, you guys have, except they cook kind of traditional foods, but sometimes with like a bent, right? Things tend to not be as heavy. Things tend to not be as fatty. Things tend to like have this kind of fresh farm to table bent that's kind of consistent with the time, right? So yeah, for the most part it stays consistent, but also there are some changes as cultures interact with each other. Okay? Here's a very long definition, okay, but I think it's important for you to have. Okay? Culture is a unique meaning and information system. It's shared by and transferred across generations that allows groups to meet basic needs of survival. So culture serves as this kind of broad organizational sort of structure, right? So that if you belong to this culture, you kind of know how to act, right? Because these behaviors or these different ways that you can act have been shown to be effective in helping you survive, right? So it's passed through social behaviors, right? And these sort of lay out the foundation to what is believed to be, helpful in you living a healthy, productive life. Right? So by coordinating social behavior, achieve viable existence, right? And to pursue happiness, well-being, and derive meaning from life. Okay? Pretty long definition, right? But it's a really important definition to have. Okay? I'll give you a minute to kind of jot that down. I will say too that I post slides online prior to lectures, but they're pretty spotty slides. They serve as an outline to the lecture. So it's not like you just download those slides and be good. Right? I think it's a good idea to download them and then maybe print them out 3 to a page, right? And then take notes next to them if you want. But yeah, you're not going to be able to use them as kind of standalone material. So you'll have to combine them with the lectures. You guys good? A couple more, maybe a minute more to kind of jot down this definition. And cultural psychology is a pretty big area within psychology. I actually started out in a cultural psychology lab working with Dr. Stephanie Freiberg. She's now at the University of Michigan. She does a lot of work on perceptions of American Indians based. Well, some of her earlier works was on how sports mascots using American Indians affects perceptions of American Indians by others, but also by American Indians who kind of have to live with these mascots, right? The Washington Redskins, for example. Right? Okay. All right, so let's look at a quick profile of America and its people. America in nature, what makes us unique is the people, right? In terms of its multiculturalism. So we'll take a look at race and ethnicity makeup. We'll look at religion makeup. But know that when the population is broken down, many different groups exist, and each group has specific health issues, and the size of each group change over time. So for example, the Latino group is a very quick growing ethnic group in the United States. Okay. So here's a brief snapshot of race. So if you look at, so if you've taken this before, like a questionnaire on race, right? If you're Hispanic or Latino, you'll check white, right? So if we don't separate out Hispanic or Latino descent, if we just count all of them as white, and there are about 76% of Americans are white, right? 13% are Black or African Americans. And then Asians coming in strong at 5.9%. And then you see the other categories as well. If you separated out whites between Hispanic and Latino and white alone, you'll see the breakdown there. That's it's 18% and 60%, right? So quite diverse. By the way, I'm sure you guys are like in the know more than I am, but in psychology literature, so for a long time we used African Americans, and now that term you won't see as often because there are many Black people who aren't necessarily from Africa. So the term that we often use now is Black American, capitalized B, right? The term we don't use is Blacks, right? So whenever you use a color and just use that as the noun itself, it's not a good look. Just like if you say, you know, gay people, that's probably okay. If you say the gays, that's probably not okay, right? So the same thing is true if you use Black American, that's appropriate according to the APA. But if you use Blacks or the Blacks, that's obviously not okay. Okay. So like if you're walking about your world and you see someone refer to African Americans as Black Americans, like don't be surprised. Don't think that like that's that's not an okay thing to do. Okay. All right, religions. So this is a breakdown of the United States. Okay, in the world, if you had to guess, in the world, what percent of the world practices some form of Christianity? Just throw some random numbers out at me. 60%. Okay, other takers. How about we play this game? I'll go like you say a number and I'll say higher or lower. Lower than 60. 40. Lower than 40. Higher than 25. Yeah, 30-ish. So about a third of the world practices some form of Christianity. Okay, but you know, where our view of how many people practice Christianity is probably skewed by the fact that we live in America and the majority of people practice Christianity, right? So about 31% in the world practices some form of Christianity. About 24% are Muslim, 16% unaffiliated, 15% Hindu. Okay. In the US, though, much different. So then in the US, you have about 70% who are Christian. Right. This is a breakdown of non-Christian faith. Buddhists, me, coming in strong at 0.7%. All right. And then this is a huge growing group here, unaffiliated. Right? In America, this group has grown leaps and bounds over the last decade or so. Okay? I guess I don't know. Is it okay if I ask you guys, well, how many of you guys would consider yourself unaffiliated? Like, so, yeah. So that's like agnostic, atheist, other, what are other categories? What am I missing? Does that kind of capture most of it? Yeah. It's a huge growing group, right? People are really struggling to like understand why. Right? I don't know. Do you guys care to share? Like, you know, if you're not comfortable with sharing, you don't have to. But like, why? Why do you think that you are unaffiliated? Okay. Okay, cool. So it's, you know, it's less about higher deity than about being kind of present in this world. I like that. Yes. Yeah. So you kind of want to you know, do your due diligence and kind of figure out where you belong in terms of religion instead of just maybe doing what your parents did, right? What do you guys think is the #1 predictor of what religion you follow? Your parents? Close. Grandparents. I like it though. That's creative. Why do you, huh? People that are around you, that's pretty close. It's your geographic location, right? Just like you can imagine here, growing up in the United States, pretty good chance you'll be Christian. If you grow up in India, pretty good chance you're probably Buddhist or Hindu, right? If you grow up in Afghanistan, right? Pretty low chance that you're going to be, I don't know, Jewish, probably. Pretty high chance that you're going to be practicing Muslim, right? So, but imagine that, right? We love killing each other over religion, but like the #1 predictor of what you tend to believe is just like where you grow up. Right? So this group has sort of ballooned in the United States, this unaffiliated religious group. People love to blame millennials, right? It's like millennials are also ruining religion for everyone. Although you guys aren't even millennials, like you guys are, what's the next one? Gen Z or something like that. What years like comprise millennials? Do you guys know? Birthdays? It can't be after 99 because I'm considered millennial. I'm 86. Huh? Okay. Let's Google. Millennial birthdays. Birth years. Okay, yeah, 77 to wait, that can't be right. Millennials, yep, we're born from 77 to 95. 77 is pretty old, right? Like when we think of millennials, you think of like people eating avocado toast and ruining the economy, but like 77 is pretty old. How old are you if you're born in 77? Someone quick. 40, yeah, 45. Oh, it's 2022 now. 45 years old and still being blamed for everything. Yes, Sam? Gen Z. Let's see here. 7 and 2012. Okay. I don't know what the new one's called. I don't know. Huh? Gen X. Okay. And then this new generation is just generation COVID. Generation C, maybe. So most of you guys are probably like in this Gen Z type of thing. Don't worry, we'll blame you too for things. Anyways, I saw like an article recently that's like Gen Z is entering the workforce and they're making fun of you, right, for wearing skinny jeans and having side parts and whatever else. So you guys can take it and leave. All right. So anyways, that is the kind of breakdown for religions in the United States. I do want to point out one thing though, like the percentage of folks who are Muslim, it's less than 1%. Okay. If you watch a lot of news, right, you might be convinced that it's a lot higher, just because it's perhaps one of the fallacies that we have, is that if we can think of it more easily, we think that they're more likely to exist, which might not be true. That is known as the availability heuristic. Right? If you take a social psych class, you'll probably learn more about those heuristics. Questions, comments, concerns? Anything surprising to you? Like, are you surprised by the percent of Christians in the United States? Not really. It's on par. You are?
Yeah, I feel like
Yeah. Yeah. But definitely that, and this probably varies by region, right? Like, you know, like if you're in San Antonio, there's probably a lot of folks who are Catholic. And then, you know, if you go along the South, you'll probably see a lot, you know, other varieties of Christianity. Perhaps when you migrate, you know, towards California, you see those damn liberals and their atheist stuff, right? But even within that, there are kind of pockets of religiosity. Right? Very cool. Okay. All right. So another thing we want to look at, another example of multiculturalism in America is socioeconomic status. Okay, SES. We talk about SES a lot in health psych because it's a really, really important predictor of health. So socioeconomic status, we typically measure using income or religion. By the way, to be classified as poor in the United States, below the poverty line, you guys know what the income is? 40, that's generous. We'll play higher, lower. 30, lower. $23,500 for a family of 4 to be officially considered poor. Like, I think you can double that and still feel pretty poor, right? But that's how far we are in terms of how we define poverty. Okay. All right. So let's see. Socioeconomics or social economic status, or SES, is closely related to access to care, insurance. Right? Someone recently on Twitter asked, like, how do you know that you've made it? Right? Like, what things in your house, you know, are day to day in your everyday life that maybe your parents didn't have? That's like an indicator that you've kind of made it in the world, or you're no longer poor. Right? The first thing that came to my mind is like, if I get sick, I go to the doctor. Like, and that was not always the case. Maybe even about 10 years ago, right? Like, I have health insurance now. Before that, I get sick, I go like, I don't know, how much is it gonna cost, right? I don't think I can afford that right now. I'll just hang out, right? And for many people in the United States, that is still the equation. It's like, I'm sick, but can I afford it? Right. So, anyways, what things in your life do you think like, oh man, I've made it? Like, I have a Costco membership. I'm pretty good. Much better than my parents said. Huh? You got a pool in the backyard? certainly. That's nice. You classy. Okay, not you specifically, but yes, if you have a pool in your backyard or a pool boy, right, that might be a sign that you've made it. How about other signs? Huh? Yeah, if you have land, you build you guys are thinking too big. I'm thinking like, if you can eat out a couple of nights a week and you're like, oh, that's not gonna like make me go broke, right? I can afford to have someone come clean my house a couple of times a month. That's making it big, right? Not me, I can't afford. That's an example. I can't afford that. It's just an example. Other things? Yeah, that's crazy, right? That like you can go like, I think that's one of my other indicators too. I go to the store, and if there are things I want to buy, I just buy it, food wise, right? I have a car, right? Like for a long time, my parents, so we grew up where like meat was really expensive. So like meat was eaten as something that adds flavor, not like as a big nutritious source. So like for a big meal, we have rice. Rice is always the standard, some type of vegetable, and then you have like a tiny piece of meat that you kind of divide up amongst family members, right? I remember like being a kid, like they would give me like a slightly bigger piece, or like my dad would not eat his meat and give like his piece of meat to me, right? But yeah, like now I just go to the store, and if I'm hungry for something, I just buy it, which is like, you know, it's pretty neat. It's pretty wild. Anyways, okay, so socioeconomic status is related to access to care, incidence of disease. So poor people get sick more often, and so not just your individual SES, but also the neighborhood you live in also predicts your health. For example, neighborhood SES is related to crime, related to food availability. Yeah, so SES is a huge deal. Okay. So what's really interesting though is that it's not just about your objective SES, which is like how much money you make, what type of education you have. But what's really important too is your subjective SES. So it's how you see yourself in relation to other people. Right? One of the more common strategies we use to measure SES in the research I do is something called the Subjective SES scale. So it looks like this. It's got a ladder, right? And it just asks you, okay, in relation to other people in your life, right, or in the world around you, how do you see yourself? A 10 is like better than everyone else, and a 1 is pretty much worse off than anyone else. Okay, and so you can kind of pick on this continuum. What's interesting is that how you see yourself on this ladder tends to be a better predictor of your health, right? So for example, your cardiovascular health, like your rate of heart attacks, tends to be better predicted by how you view yourself in relation to other people using this scale than your objective income alone, right? So it's not just about how much money you make, but it's how much money you make that you think is compared to other people. If you don't think, even if you're making good money, but if you don't think you're doing very well compared to other people, then your health tends to deteriorate, or at least it's related to poorer health outcomes. Okay? All right, so I think that's kind of a cool fact to point out. Okay. All right, sex is another sort of cultural, or we can define culture in terms of sex too. Okay, so facts we know: women live longer than men pretty much across the globe. You guys saw day one when we talked about, you know, like life expectancy, right? How that differs. By the way, you guys know that life expectancy is like calculated on the year that you were born, not like the current world, right? So, you know, if you see news reports that's like life expectancy falls for the first time, that's not like your life expectancy, right? Life expectancy is calculated based on the year that you were born, right? So, you know, like if you read a report that's like life expectancy is now at 78, it doesn't mean that you guys are going to live to be 78. It means that the people born this year, they are expected to live to be 78, right? Does that kind of make sense? So we can play this game if you want. The internet is wonderful. Life expectancy. Also, life expectancy by year of birth, right? So let's play this game. Sure. If you were born, this doesn't have a breakdown by gender. Boo. Because that's obviously different, right? Women live much longer than men. You'll see generally that life is increased. Okay. By the way, when you look at the 1980s and things like that, or I mean the 1800s, super depressing, right? It doesn't mean that people didn't live to be old, by the way, right? It's not like you go back to like 1870 and it's like, oh no, there are very few 40-year-olds. That's kind of not how it works. It's that number is probably dragged down by the fact that there are a lot of babies that died early on, right? So that gets averaged in as a 0, right? So people did live to be pretty old. It's not like everyone dies around 40, but just the rate of kids dying was just a lot higher back then, right? We're a little bit better now. You'll see like this made news that we kind of dipped for the first time in a long time in 2000, and our life expectancy now is expected to drop because of COVID, right? So anyways, what are you guys born in? Probably 2000, probably most of you guys. Life expectancy around 76 in the United States. Okay. And again, that's different based on sex. Okay. All right. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about when it comes to sex? So female babies are generally more likely to survive harsh conditions by a handful of points. Estrogen, so in women, is protective against heart disease, cardiovascular illness in those younger than 50. Right. However, women are at risk at some other things that men tend to not be of a high risk for example, violence and sexual assault. Okay. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So you're surprised that women live longer because they have to give. Right. So now it's still very much that women live probably about 10 years younger than men. There are a host of different factors, but you know, some of the main factors is that like men tend to be more they tend to be more risk seekers. Also, women, so this is the interesting thing, is that women tend to report more symptoms. And so the saying is that men die earlier, but women are sicker, right? So it might be that women are more in tune with their bodies and they're more likely to seek help when they feel sick as opposed to men. Right? There are a bunch of mechanisms to explain this difference, but yeah, no, it's still very much that women live a lot longer than men do, even though they have to deal with childbirth, or have to do is a strong term, but they're engaged in childbirth. That's not good either. They get to bring the miracle of life into the world. Yeah. Uh-huh. So great question. We're going to get into this. Health in the US, when we talk about race, Black Americans have pretty much the lowest health across pretty much every group. Pregnant mothers are like 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth. Infants, Black infants, are more likely to die in childbirth. There are a variety of different factors. For example, one of the main mechanisms is probably just the systemic racism that Black people have to deal with. So for us, for example, most of us, when we walk around our neighborhoods, we don't have this elevated level of risk. We call a cab, we don't have these levels of risk. We go out to dinner, we don't experience some of the same issues, right? So generally speaking, their systems are working harder because it's more elevated. They have to deal with all of these issues. But there are things that affect health also on like a personal level, right? So for example, time and time again, studies have demonstrated that people think that Black people can tolerate more pain than they actually can. So, research has demonstrated that Black Americans or Black people generally are very sensitive to levels of pain, but people who look at facial expressions that normally would indicate pain, they don't recognize the same level of pain in Black people. So generally, they're perceived to be more like they're perceived to be physically superior, right? So when they tell doctors that they experience pain, people don't believe them, right? They're not perceived the same way. That's one of the mechanisms as well. There are a host of mechanisms, and we'll get there. But yes, consistently across the board, Black Americans experience sort of the worst health outcomes in the United States. Yeah. So we'll get to it. Good stuff. Good question. Okay. Other questions, comments, concerns? Other things we want to talk about, right? So sex probably affects issues related to eating disorders, diet issues, image issues probably affects women differently than men. Not probably, they do, right? I just like every time I turn on the TV, I just can't imagine like how hard it is to be like a girl or a woman. Like it's like your toes aren't right. Like you got to cut them like this. You got to paint them. You're like, you shouldn't have hair on these areas. And here's how to treat them. Your eyebrows are wrong, right? Like your hair is whack. Like everything that you turn on is just like, here are all the things that is wrong with you, right? And you probably, you see some of it with men, but probably not as much, right? Like women are just being constantly inundated with the fact that like, whatever you're doing, it's probably not good enough. And here's how you can be better, right? So obviously that sort of is that becomes ingrained, and that affects one's health. Okay. One thing that we do want to mention is that sex. So some of the changing on this is changing, but sex generally, when we talk about sex, we're talking about your biological self, like what you were born as, right? Whereas gender is more sort of socially and psychologically constructed. So I'm going to show you this quick video that maybe will help explain it a little bit better than I do, because some of the stuff is kind of relatively new to me too, and I'm trying to learn it alongside you guys. Let me see here. Where's my Zoom? Where's the optimize for? Yeah, whatever. Hang on.
Plan International is committed to achieving gender equality and fostering an inclusive society. We support and empower adolescents in all their diversity, regardless of their gender, ability, ethnicity, or any other identity. This includes sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics, or SOGIESC for short. But what actually is SOGIESC? Let's break it down using the SOGIESC person. This helps us understand that each of the individual terms has a different meaning, and combined, they make up a person's SOGIESC identity. Let's start with sexual orientation. This is shown as the heart, as it's about who you are emotionally, physically, and sexually attracted to. One person might be attracted to someone of a different gender to themselves. For example, a woman who is heterosexual is attracted to men. Another person might be attracted to someone of the same gender as themselves. For example, a woman who is a lesbian is attracted to other women. Yet another person might be attracted to people of more than one gender. For example, a woman who is bisexual is attracted to both men and women. Now, let's talk about gender identity. This is shown as the brain, as it's about how you think and feel about yourself and your gender. Some people identify as either a woman or a man. This is a common way of thinking, but actually, many people feel that they don't fit with these two genders. They might feel they are a mixture of the two, or are something else that can't be clearly defined. A person's gender identity might reflect the sex that they were assigned at birth, or it might not. For example, a trans woman might have been described as male at birth, but now identifies as female. Now, gender expression. This involves the whole person because it is about the different ways that you communicate your gender identity to the outside world. This could include how you dress, what haircut you have, how you act, or what name you use. Finally, let's talk about sex characteristics. We show these as genitalia because they reflect whether someone is biologically and physically female or male. As well as your external genitalia, sex characteristics include your hormones, chromosomes, body shape, voice pitch, and body hair. A person who is intersex is born with sex characteristics that are not completely male or female. They are a combination of both. So, let's put all the pieces together. Sexual orientation is about who you are emotionally, physically, and sexually attracted to. Gender identity is about how you think and feel about yourself and your gender. Gender expression is about how you communicate your gender identity to the outside world. And sex characteristics are about your biology, such as genitalia, hormones, and body shape. Each of us has a sexual orientation, a gender identity, a gender expression, and sex characteristics. They combine to make up our unique Soji-esque identity. Soji-esque is fluid. This means that there are lots of different options with no right or wrong way to be. Also, things can change over time. Our Soji-esque identity combines with other factors such as our age, where we live, whether we are rich or poor, or whether we have a disability to make who we are. It also affects our power in society. Sometimes people are discriminated or excluded because of their sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics. This includes people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, intersex, or questioning, known as LGBTIQ+. We all have the right to define and be proud of our Soji-esque identity. There is no need to stereotype or harm people. Everyone is unique. We must all recognize, accept, and celebrate this diversity. For more information, see plan-international.org.
So I think there's I think the takeaway message is that it's complex, right? And oh, I was like, what is that?
We asked some people in our community a simple question.
So yes, question.
What was the name of the video?
The name of the video. Let's go back.
Plan International is committed to
It's called Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity, What's the Difference? It's by Plan International. So, you know, I think that, did you get it? Okay. The takeaway message is that, you know, it's one's identity is complex, right? So gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, sexual orientation. I think this is, you know, imagining people as like these gingerbread people and kind of ascribing these characteristics, I think is a really interesting approach. But I think as college educated folks, I think you need to have a more nuanced understanding of sex and gender beyond probably what most of the world understands. Right? Questions, comments, concerns? Right. Okay, so let's see. 12:06.